Hello, this is Hiroshi Shibe with another Hiroshi Shibe Thought Bubble. And on this episode, I am talking about John Nash and the ideal money part two. So, what is it about, basically? So, my, attempt to break down everything that is going to deal with the term of ideal money, particularly with this relationship to Bitcoin in and of itself. Okay, there was a big colonuffle. Looks like I'm live, but hello? Hello? So I'm going to start again. This is Hiroshi Shibe with another Hiroshi's Thought Bubble, and I am talking about John Nash and the ideal money. This is part two. Part one, which you will see in the top corner in the little, um, when I put this video up, you'll see a little eye icon, and you just click on that and you can watch part one, or you can continue watching part two. And at the end of the video, you'll see this video, part one, which talks about ideal money, the actual lecture that John Nash gave. And he would give through many countries the concept of ideal money. He would talk to people constantly over a 20-year period about his basically his economic idea. And what is that idea? Well, it's a little complicated and it's a little simplistic at the same time and very political. So let's start back at the paper and kind of get into where it's a little complicated. So, everyone. All right. So You have his paper right here. The lecture by John Nash, The Idea of Money and the Astronomical Idea of Money. This is kind of the concept of where you can reach almost infinity, but you haven't reached anything. And it's just his way of saying that, in a kind of almost, I think, cheeky way, that ideal money, it should be stable, but not perfectly stable. It's almost perfect, but not quite. It almost is constantly in a state of trying to achieve perfection, but doesn't quite ever reach it. And that is probably the best place an ideal money can be. And we'll get into that, back into that concept. I just want to kind of touch on the title here. This is where things get a little bit complicated. Just the very beginning of the intro. The special commodity or medium that we call money has a long and interesting history. And since we're so dependent on our use of it and so much controlled and motivated by the wish to have more of it and not to lose what we have, we may become irrational in thinking about it and fail to be able to reason about it like about technology such as a radio to be used more or less efficiently. So right off the bat, this is where he gets up to the front that the biggest problem with our basically economic system, the way we view money, is people themselves. How we view money is irrational. We're very emotional. It's very difficult for people to think in a clear, rational manner because everything that ties to our existence is tied into this technology, because that's what money is really. If you fundamentally think about it and boil it down to, it's just basic ingredient. It's a form of technology, a transfer of wealth from one person to another, or utility from one person to another. So there's that. Where it gets political is when you have Keynesian economics, which is basically, as he breaks it down, a central banking philosophy, a centralized format of controlling economics in which you're basically trying to control inflation, and that you're stating that you can control inflation at certain different types of percentages, and the printing of money, basically. So there's that. He also talks about the nature of money here, where he talks about how people, again, behavior, people are a big component of why the problem with money in of itself. And from there, you build up into states and things of that nature, and how it makes it very difficult to implement something like what he considers an ideal money. Let's get to here. So right here is the key component of his, one of his key components of an ideal money. So it's better now to cover again in the full grounds the ideas presented there in the Pacific about how ideal money currencies can be arranged for by using linkage to an appropriate index of price of international trading commodities. So basically, this is where you get this concept of what is called a basket of commodities, where money, the markets, are what create the value or utility of a money. And it's backed by either the national, or in this case, international commodities that are traded. So, for example, the examples he gives at the time, um, and so in sense about his speeches about certain commodities like silver, tungsten, aluminum, steel, anything that's traded, and how they're used in the usage of them in the international marketplace, how they're traded, what is allocated, what is used, is copper up, is copper down, is silver more utilized, is steel, granites, I think eventually you can put anything in those type of things in that section about commodities, like robotics. Um, I would say even computational power, supercomputers, things of that nature can be traded, in this international commodities market. And this was what would back the value of a particular money system, because it's purely driven by the markets. It's not driven by a national or centralized entity. It's driven by the collective effort of the international markets. And some people take umbrage with this. Some people think that this is not really the standard that we should be seeking. But this is where you get the concept, if you've ever heard of the basket of commodities. So this is what he says should be the thing that's backing money, this concept of money. So fundamentally what it comes down to, if we were to summarize what an ideal money is a standard on its own. So let's look at Bitcoin. Take an image of Bitcoin. You know, the typical form of Bitcoin right here. So Bitcoin in itself, it's standard, for example, like the standard that he talked about in money. He talked about radio, the technology to view it. But he talked about energy, watts. You know, how you measure watts is in watts. For power consumption is kilowatts. How you measure water, the utility of water, is gallons. You wouldn't translate the measurement of gallons to energy, and you wouldn't use the measurement of kilowatts to water. They are their unique standard, how it's distributed, how it's measured, how it's channeled or utilized. It's very standard across the board. How energy is utilized in China to even to the United States has the same standard and principles. Now it may be have a little refinement, you know, a little different type of implementation, really. Like, for example, maybe they have, like, I don't know, different coloring for their wires or their outlets. And there's a difference between, you know, European outlets and state outlets, or basically state outlets in the rest of the world. We have different wattage that we utilize, where the world does a different standard, but how that energy is conceived and distributed is basically the same. That's why you can have a conversion unit. It's not the energy in England is no different than the energy in the United States. There is a standard system. There's a measurement in how it's distributed and how it's seen and perceived. And so he is stating that money should have that type of uniqueness. It shouldn't have these ad hoc things. It shouldn't be made on the fly. It should have a same standard of its own that nobody else can utilize. And it says Bitcoin does have that own standard. It has, you know, the concept of proof of work, the computational power of the SHA-256, the algorithm, the difficulty of adjustment, if you will, to achieve to reach the different coins when they're produced, putting the, you know, the different transaction fees. There is a standard that's been set by Bitcoin of how a cryptocurrency should function. And so in those terms, all everybody else is held to and has made its own uniqueness in the standard. And so its property as Bitcoin, it has a standard of its own. It's its own unique property that nobody else can make really too much of a measurement of. And it has achieved that kind of status. You know, you have your Litecoins, you have your Ethereums, your Dogecoins, your Vertcoins, your EOSs, but Bitcoin is the standard, and they're measured to the standard. And if they don't meet that standard, they're not considered good or of quality or of that type of standard. They don't measure it. They're not um, basically, because they don't have that standard or meet that standard, they're not capable of being distributed globally. They're not capable of being understood universally by everyone. And that's pretty much what he means by the standard, that not only being owned and unique to that particular commodity, because he's considering money should be kind of like a commodity if you bring it to the markets fully, but it should it's not something that can be, you know, transferable in a sense. Even though Bitcoin is tied to the fiat system, no matter what type of currency in the global system, and we'll get back to that in a moment, it still has its own unique standard. You don't use the same standard of measurements when it comes to fiat to that of Bitcoin. They're completely different types of standards. So there's that. And two, because of these standard sets, you can have the ideal money be useful. So anywhere, anytime, because now that you've established a standard, That means that, just as I said with energy, the energy is done the same way in China, United States, anywhere. It's the same way. How you turn on a light bulb is the same way, universal. You know, kilowatts, the electrical wiring, the distribution of power, it's the same. Gallons of water, the same. Water may taste differently. You might have certain, I don't know, distribution issues and stuff like that. And, you know, water is very difficult of that nature. But I'm just talking about in the first world status about, you know, with pipes and sewers and things of that nature. It's fairly freaking standard. You turn on the faucet, turn the handle, water comes out. It's basic. You know, you can take your 2-year-old, you can go for a visit to, you know, I don't know, the London. Maybe you have some business over there. Your kid can go to London, go to the bathroom, turn on the faucet because he gets on his little stool, brushes his little teeth, and he doesn't have to be educated the way on how they do things in England to utilize a water faucet. And vice versa. If you, for example, if you live in England and you were to come to Disney World or something like that, visit Disney World or whatever, you don't have to educate your child on the ways how Americans utilize water. There is a standard. And because of that universal kind of aspect of it, because of that standard, because of the global standard set, ideal money could be useful anywhere, anytime, day or night. Bitcoin is traded 24/7. It can and be useful anywhere, anytime, as well as other cryptocurrencies that meet that standard that Bitcoin has set. The third thing is that the needs of ideal money should kind of fit in the sense of monetary system, but better. One is the short term, so like buying items, smaller investments. He talked about in his paper how the depreciation of value of here. Consider a society where money is used as subject to rapid and unpredictable rate or inflation, so that money worth 100 might now be worth from 50 to 10 by a year from now. Who would want to lend money for the term of a year? So if you wanted to lend money in a year's time, ideal money would still retain its value towards the end of the year. It may even increase in value, but it wouldn't decrease. There wouldn't be such a significant inflation as in the case of this example, or for example, was occurring on in Zimbabwe, that you wouldn't utilize that money in that way. You use it completely different, or you exit out of that money and go to the good money. This would be considered bad money because you can't do the things that you need to utilize it. Small investments, shorter yields. He talks about domestics within the norms of a nation. So the things and activities in the particular region you're in, you should be able to utilize ideal money. So if you're interacting and engaging in the States or Canada or wherever you're living, you should be able to utilize that ideal money. Now, if you can't, for example, you know, the U.S. is still the standard. There might be some places you can use euros. There might be other places you can use pounds, but you probably couldn't use yens everywhere, or was the Chinese dollar, the yuan. It doesn't have the same transferable weight globally, but it functionally works within its provenance. Like, for example, the yuan should always work within the, the the area of China. And when it doesn't work, when it doesn't function, then it's not ideal money. Again, what's going on in Zimbabwe, people are not, or Venezuela, people are not actually using the currency within that country. They're using other currencies because the currency in their country has been so inflated, so devalued, that it's worthless. It cannot function within their given space. So it's not ideal money. Talking about internationally speaking, so for example, currently as we speak, the US dollar is pretty much widely received anywhere. Even places that say they don't accept the dollar or prohibit the dollar, if you flash like 100 or 10 or 20, someone's going to take it because it has universal value. It's something that is taken anywhere. But the problem with the US dollar, in which ideal money has a property that the US dollar doesn't, is long-term use. So it has to have the ability to be able to address the needs of the common person, the nation, international community, or any groups of people for the long term. So it can't be depreciated. You can't have significant inflation to where the value and the utility, for example, the ability, like in Venezuela, for the boulevard to be able to function domestically within your country, to be able to do short-term, lending or buying or purchasing, or even to be able to trade out internationally. Who's really truly accepting boulevards for dollars? Nobody, because it's so worthless. So it has to be able to function in a long-term fashion. Now, Nash didn't say that you couldn't have inflation. In fact, he believed that inflation, we'll go for the Wikipedia here. Where is it here that he says it? Yeah. When he's talking about how the currency of the euro could be an example of an ideal money. So here he goes. John Nash mentioned in his lecture that euro might become an ideal money in the future because euro is used in a large range of places and has a good stability. It is the currency used by the institutions of the European Union and is the official currency of the Eurozone, which consists of 18 of the 28 members of the European Union. In general, the euro has a macroeconomic stability. People in Europe owning large amounts of euros are served by high stability and low inflation. So you can have low inflation, but you can't have like this high inflation, as was given the example of his money lecture, where you're going from, beginning of the year you had something that was worth 100, midway is worth half that, and then by the end of the year it's 10% of its value. You can't function in the short term with that. You can't even maybe function regionally in that area with something like that consistently happening, and you can't function long term like that. So you can have some inflation, and Nash concedes that he doesn't believe in zero inflation. Zero inflation would be great, but you can have a very small percentage of inflation as long as all the principles of the standard being kept, the kind of going back here, sorry. The anywhere, anytime is still being done. It can be utilized within the region of a given area. It can be used for long-term usage for both by people, companies, and nations. As long as these standards are still being kept, you can have a little bit of inflation. I can't. You said you were going to stop for that. All right, for that. Okay. Where was I? Okay, so you can have a little bit of inflation, okay? You can have some inflation, but as long as the key points are met, the standard, the anywhere, anytime, the short term domestic, international, and long-term usage, these three principles are kept and met, then you can have that little bit of inflation. It's also his biggest thing that Nash really emphasizes. Even if you get close to zero inflation, say you get like a 1 or 2% inflation, which is something that the Swedes had done for a pretty long time. Is why they were considered, what is it, Znarks? It's in here. Their fiat currency was considered good money. Is as long as it's never negative inflation. You don't ever want negative inflation, because when you have negative inflation, then basically you're just not only ruining the currency, but you're ruining the possibility of people being able to save and create future wealth for themselves. So you're killing the long-term angle of your particular monetary system, which many economic systems have done with the negative interest rates. If you hold money in different banks, it forces you to spend and therefore penalizing you if you try to save. So it kills the aspect of having a long-term value. So because you can't have negative inflation, savings and storage of value or earnings is a key component to ideal of money. And because of that, you can get the general accessibility, the measure of value, this will lead to stability of value. So this is not something that can be done instantaneously. And this is why he said can be very difficult to achieve. This kind of transition to the ideal money system, because one, you are divorcing yourself away from centralized authorities. You're dependent on the free market system. Because what you're doing to the currency is you're throwing it into the free market system. You're causing a currency to compete much like a commodity. You're almost pegging it to, as he put it, the um, the industrial consumption price index, where you have the basket of commodities backing your currency. So however the strength of like your steel and the commodity goods of the entire international community backing this currency, if you will, this ideal money. And you're causing people to compete against themselves. So they're not going to do things like causing negative interest rates if you keep savings. They're not going to try to devalue their currency because it kills the short term. It prevents their currency internally from being utilized, and people internationally are not going to accept the currency because it's worthless. So because of that, he believes that the ideal for money is over time competing and meeting these goals and meeting these standards. It becomes more stable, not perfectly stable, near perfection, but what it does is as over time it meets these goals, it does become stable. Now Bitcoin in itself has not even come close to reaching that at all. We're nowhere from near stable, but we do have a standard set. It's something that is accepted anywhere at any time. It does fill the needs of kind of the needs of ideal money, in the sense of the short-term means of buying items and small investments and shorter yields. If you're trading in and out of your fiat into Bitcoin or Bitcoin into fiat, or trading in general. It's some places, this is where it doesn't quite meet it quite yet. In some places it's accepted domestically, but it has to be anywhere, anytime. You can buy and sell Bitcoin anywhere, anytime, but the function of it as a currency is not anywhere, anytime. Internationally, it is accepted in the buying and selling, but again, it's not that whole short-term game of anytime, anywhere. And long-term is not quite there yet, but it's reaching those steps. It's getting close to there. And this is why some people consider John Nash's idea of ideal money is applicable to Bitcoin in of itself. That it eventually, through time, reach these standards and goals. But there are those who don't think quite yet that Bitcoin is there. We're not quite there in talking about that. What else did I want to talk about? So let's kind of sum up the ideal of money. I think I'm done with the paper. I'm done with the Wicca. So where do I want to come from here? Where's a key point? Okay, so here on this website called the Wealth of Chips, because Bitcoin as a decent but not necessarily ideal benchmark, especially since it's exchangeable in nearly every country, the results of market competition is that any currency wishing to survive must evolve to be better represented in respective of underlying ICPI. So because of Bitcoin's the standard that it has, the computational power, the SHA-256, it's distributed globally, it's decentralized. It's not coming from a centralized authority. There's nobody controlling like inflation or devaluation or causing negative interest rates. It could be better with this decentralization distribution, but it's so widely spread out, and it is very fairly global, that because it's really competing in the free market place when it comes to a currency system. People either put in or they buy in, buy out, utilize, build upon it, whether it be businesses or making the code better or creating competition within the cryptocurrency space, um, accepting Bitcoin, trading out Bitcoin, accepting fiat, trading out fiat, things of that nature, causing the free market system to work within the cryptocurrency system. It's completely raw. It's very unregulated. It's subject to the almost to the whims of the people, really, if you think about it, considering how emotional people can be when it comes to trading. The big sell-off sometimes, a little bit of the market manipulation in some cases. Because of that, it's putting pressure on fiat currencies to be better, to compete with for the first time, really. And because of that, you're going to have some concerns, you're going to have some pushback, or eventually through time, these currencies are either going to have to evolve, get their act together, set a standard for themselves, be both short-term and long-term value for their people, be able to transact easily within their nation with that value, or and it still could be internationally, or they're going to die out and be supplanted by the ideal money. So kind of reading here. So starting with the ideal value stabilization relationship to a domestic price index associated with the territory of one state, there's a natural and logical concept of international based comparisons. Currencies being compared like now, the euro, the dollar, the yen, the pound, the Swiss franc, and the Swedish kroner, etc., can be viewed with critical eyes by their users and by those who maybe have the option or whether or not or how to use one of them. This can lead to pressure for good quality and consequently for a lesser rate of inflationary depreciation of value. So he already talked about that with the already existing currency systems. And mind you, he's talking about this way prior to the actual creation of Bitcoin or any kind of cryptocurrency at all, or that even development of the marketplace that we currently have as of now. So, in conclusion, here is one I want to kind of read out and then talk about how Bitcoin might not exactly meet completely the ideal concept of money. But the conclusion outlined in this writing is that the standard of idealness, whether solely theoretically or not, isn't Bitcoin per se, but rather a theoretical of future money whose supply and monetary policies function in a stable and predictable relationship to the underlying ICPI. This theoretically ideal has been shown as impossible to reach in design, yet effectively and naturally achievable with the implementation of a universally exchangeable money that is truly competitive, predictable, and stable in nature, in the Nashian sense, i.e. Bitcoin. So while Bitcoin doesn't quite meet, as I stated earlier, the, the idealness of what Nash is seeking, and may in fact be supplanted by that ideal money, it does help, achieve that process. And Bitcoin could, in essence, help accelerate the process of an ideal money that is stable, that is predictable, that you know that when you wake up in the morning, you haven't lost value, you may even in fact gain value, or nothing has really significantly changed. But what you're not doing is, you're not, as you see those memes all the time of like what $100 bought you in the grocery store in 1950, and then 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the aughts in 2010, and you can see the diminishing value of what that $100 got you. And that's in essence what ideal money is meant to do, is help the growth of the economic system, make it more stable, make it more fair, make it more transparent in a sense, make it competitive, make it more rational, where we're not reacting in such an emotional manner, making it less nationalized and more global internationally, where you're having more of a cooperative effort, or at least a competitive effort on the part of countries to be better with their currency systems and actually fully compete in the global place. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the point there that was made in that previous article, where the pressure that Bitcoin is putting on the fiat currencies to be competitive. You kind of saw that in a sense in the real world with Zimbabwe. Well, I don't believe Bitcoin is the cause of their leader Mugabe, I think is how you pronounce his name, from being overthrown in essence, actually kind of peacefully, in the sense that there's no blood in the streets or anything like that, or a civil war, knock on wood, breaking out, is because Bitcoin was almost like you could say a siren call. It started, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin marketplace had been there for a while, but it was astronomically higher in price than the overall marketplace of the rest of the world. I believe Bitcoin was the first place there. It was trading at 10,000 when everyone was buying Bitcoin at 5,000 or 3,000. It was very low in comparison. Right now it's 16K, and we're not even reaching a steady 10K yet. So it's like around 9,300. The last time I looked, let's check the Bitcoin charts. Mind you, it's a very nascent marketplace. I believe they've only sold 3 Bitcoin at that price, and they've sold entirely, I think it's called Gibabi, the Bitcoin exchange. They have sold entirely 150 Bitcoin. That's not the Bitcoin charts I wanted. Oh, I just clicked on the same one I just wanted to get out. Bitcoin price chart. That's what I wanted. There we go. 9,890. And in Zimbabwe, it is going for 16,000. So almost double the value that everyone else is paying. That's how desperate the few people that are able to purchase Bitcoin are, to be able to do some kind of monetary transactions with their currency. I think it's more of a siren call that was happening, an indicator that things were going to change within the country of Zimbabwe. I mean, its currency is a joke. People would buy $1 billion notes for like a box full of them for like $40 or something like that. It's kind of crazy. People are keeping that currency as souvenirs. The fact that there's an actual note that's $1 billion tells you a little bit something about the Zimbabwe fiat system, the economic system there. So that's the price, is 9,844. The market cap is 164.4 billion. 3,301K is actually down in daily transaction. There's 6.7 million Bitcoin minted thus far. And we still got some ways to go. Let's see. Market price. So, okay, so just going to read some of this. Wealth of chips. So is Bitcoin ideal of money? Well, not exactly. To understand ideal money, we have to think in terms of what it means to print a money based on the actual non-biased aggregated price index. In other words, what goods and commodities are actually worth. That's another key point. Like, instead of the inflated price or the value price of the fiat system brings to the price of the markets of commodities, what people would actually pay for something if they had good money, if they had a stable currency, would they be paying the prices that you see on goods all the time? Just think of again, the grocery store. Would you really be paying, $4 for a gallon of milk? Or for example, in the States, gas prices are getting a little bit over $3. Would you actually be paying for $3, or would it be really more like 150, half that, if you had a stabilized currency system that had a very low inflation, strong utility, and backed by multiple commodities, of basket of commodities, if you will? So here we go. Continuing forward, how can this be achieved? By taking the money printing abilities from the governments that are fixing the markets with, among other tactics, instability and regulation. What is needed is a single currency in the world that has a stable money supply so you can create a standard of measurement to evaluate all currencies. But no government has been able to achieve this in any significant manner because the economics of war ensue. Notice many great wars of the past and present involve money printers, Westerns versus those that denounce the process of usury, Islamic. Creating a money system via computers is not a new idea at the web base. From Bitcoin's Wiki and its money supply points to video with Milton Friedman describing such a system from his writings. In fact, the decentralized scheme is a very Austrian ideology, and Nash is admittedly familiar with. But what is asymmetrical idea? So this is basically what people are seeking to do to unseat the current economic system. So just trying to dropping down here. The author believes rather we're living. Wait a minute. Nash has spent 20 years lecturing about it to country. It seems no one was paying attention. These days, all eyes are on the ghost of Satoshi Nakamoto. I am Nash Sato Kodo. Yeah, some people think that John Nash is actually Satoshi Nakamoto, but there's been no evidence of that. One thing is for sure, when it comes to every government and major banking entity in the world, holding meetings on how to exactly react to today's rapidly changing economic climate, i.e. Bitcoin, the intelligent thing to do would be to formally ask Dr. Nash for advice and help, regardless if you think he created cryptocurrency or not. Not that he didn't already give us his advice. This is actually was written prior to the passing of John Nash and his wife in the car accident. But it's just an interesting concept of, how Bitcoin is not going to achieve this status because, really when it comes to ideal money, even if you were to do the free market type of a deal of creating a monetary system, you unfortunately, because the way humans are, you still have to have blood and guns behind it. And I hope it doesn't come down to that. But that is an aspect about Bitcoin when you're decoupled from a centralized authority that might prevent it from being not only the ideal money, but the global standard. So the last bit here is, it comes later that now that the world understands that you can choose what kind of global economy that you want to participate in, and this is why Nash feels that there may be analogy to this regards to those called the Keynesians, that while they have claimed to be operating for higher and noble objectives of the general welfare, what is clearly true is that they made it easier for governments to print money. And after comparing such practices to Bolshevik communism, announces the parallel makes it seem not impossible that process of political evolution might lead to the expectation on the part of citizens in the greater democracies that they should be better situated to be able to understand whatever will be the monetary policy, which indeed are typically of great importance to citizens, who may have the alternative option for where they place their savings. So basically what it comes down to is the best methodology of where you put your savings, and that might not necessarily be with to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is really honestly the first step to the concept of an ideal money, if it yet has not yet quite achieved that status. What's going on over there? So I hope I haven't confused you all any deeply or anything like that. I just felt it was very important to explain what ideal money is and why people speak about it. I think the next time I talk about money per se in this manner, I will talk about, the concept of good money versus bad money versus smart money. I mean, we touched on it a little bit in the John Nash paper, not too much in detail here. I think there's a little bit more added layers when you're talking about good money, bad money, or smart money, if you will. But overall, I think it's important to understand like kind of the bricks, the building blocks that help develop the concept of Bitcoin. Because John Nash's concept of an ideal money system definitely influenced Satoshi Nakamoto in the creation of Bitcoin. Is one of the influences. It's influenced the people that have come to this space when they recognize Bitcoin as a means of maybe achieving the goal of ideal money system, or if not being the stepping stone that brings about an ideal money system. And so when people talk of these terms or banter around these terms, you can at least have an understanding where the basis of this concepts are, what it is exactly they're talking about. No, I don't want to talk that. All right. So that's it. That's all I have to say for now. I thank you very much for listening. And then until next time, to the moon.